I'm going to be talking to Chris Bataille, who's an energy economist I interview frequently, about a thread on X that he posted yesterday that I think is really important. It's the grist for a conversation that Canada hasn't had about how the global energy system is changing, but we really need to have this conversation. Chris, welcome to the interview.
Great to be here, Markham.
What you argued, now you called it decarbonization, I call it electrification, particularly of the demand side of the equation. But what
Hmm.
you argued is that decarbonization is essentially rearranging the geopolitical structure of global economies.
Yes, no, exactly. You look across the economy, buildings, industry, transport, what have you. It's possible to electrify all these things. In the past, it's been too expensive. But what's been happening recently with the big changes coming out of China in terms of battery costs, EV costs, what have you, is you can now buy a battery for a car, a small car that's actually buyable in Africa, Latin America, India, what have you, and that changes everything. And do you want to explain why?
Yes, please.
Love to. No, so I did some work in Latin America several years ago looking at net zero pathways. And amongst many interesting things that I learned there is that the Latin American countries, most of them don't have refining capacity. Some of them have crude oil capacity. Only a few of them have the capacity to turn that into usable gasoline, diesel, what have you. Because of that, they have to buy their refined petroleum products from elsewhere. But purchase refined petroleum products all over the world are priced in US dollars, right? And nobody trades almost anything in the Latin American countries, maybe the Brazilian real. That's it, right? So they, in effect, to get enough petroleum products, like and specifically gasoline, diesel, to run their economies, they have to export enough other products to get the US dollars that they need to buy those refined petroleum products to drive their economy. Now that puts a twist on their whole economy to export enough to get those products, amongst other things. What electric vehicles do is they reduce the amount of refined petroleum products they have to buy, right? Which means that they can reorientate their capital investment to things that benefit them more, as opposed to just getting them enough gasoline and diesel.
I did a video last week, Chris, in which I argued that there's an increasing number of Asian countries that have very explicit policies where they want to electrify their economy. They want to electrify the demand side, the EVs, the heat pumps,
Yeah.
industrial processes. And then they want to grow out their power sector to meet that demand, and with the explicit goal of displacing oil and gas imports because those imports are so big. And I
Yeah.
think that ability to generate your energy, buy technology once, lasts for 25, 30 years. You put it up and then you generate your own energy domestically and you all of your demands stuff, that technology you buy and it lasts 10, 15, 20 years, whatever. And
Yeah.
the annual oil and gas imports then end and those payments end.
Yes. And you're less exposed to the ups and downs in the oil and gas market, right? And the spikes in the spot market prices.
So your thread basically argued that if you think of the U.S. and China as the two big geopolitical powers, the two big economic powers, and they're like magnets. And China, then all of these emerging global South countries that want to do what China does, which is electrify, they begin to swing to China. Their alliances
Hmm.
swing to China, and the United States, its pull, as it were, weakens. And
Yes.
as electrification increases, the U.S. will weaken, China will strengthen. Have I got your argument correct?
No, that's exactly it. And we have to think of the economy as being the global economy is made up of physical trading relationships. It's made up of financial trading relationships, which are mediated by currencies. But these things really reflect underlying personal relationships and firm to firm relationships and government to government relationships. The more you trade with someone, the more you buy and sell things with them, the more you talk to them, the more integrated you become with them in their long-term planning and your long-term planning. So in effect, think of it as who do you cooperate with to kind of make your economy run? And what these actions do of the United States going to countries saying, no, 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 you don't want to do net zero, you don't want to move to solar and wind, you don't want to move to electric vehicles, it effectively is encouraging more and more relationships with those countries with this, with the Sinosphere, with China over time. Now that's already been happening a lot with Africa. Africa is getting most of its new capital, its infrastructure, what have you, from China, as opposed to used to get it from Europe. But it's what the American actions now are going to, it might push Latin America into the Sinosphere. It might push much of Asia into the Sinosphere, such that in another generation from now, the economic hegemon is the term we use of it, becomes China, because everything's in their currency, everything's in their flows, the physical and financial flows are all in and out of China.
And Donald Trump seems to have come along at a very particular moment in time. If you think about this, I mean, 2025, this is like a pivotal year. China is really beginning to assert itself. It's beginning to move into the global south in a big way with its,
Mm-hmm.
exports, building plants, and so on. Trump comes in with his energy dominance doctrine and his tariff strategy, and basically it's a no carrots, all stick kind of strategy where you beat your allies into submission and they accept unilateral trade deals that are
Mm-hmm.
not maybe as advantageous as they once were. And China, by comparison, looks pretty good.
Yeah, China's, and it's looking better and better for all sorts of reasons, right? And I have to note, like with the Americans putting these heavy tariffs on and starting to actually generate revenues from them, internally they're starting to become addicted to tariff revenue, right? So in order to make their balance of payments and what have you, instead, and settling up the government accounts, instead of raising taxes, they need to decrease spending and raise taxes and bring things into line, which is what Canada had to do in the late 1990s. We know we had a big fiscal problem and we sorted it out over roughly 10 years. The Americans need to go through that process, but it's a very politically difficult process. So instead of doing the tax and spending reallocation they need to do, they're trying to get away with that with tariffs. The problem is the tariffs are going to discourage trade, which is going to discourage all those relationships we were talking about earlier, and push the trading relationships with all their erstwhile partners into the Sinosphere, into the Chinese economic sphere.
Chris, you and I were talking off camera about the historical narrative, the historical record here, because this is not the first time this has happened.
No, no.
Economic empires like the British Empire, the French Empire, and so on have all made mistakes and that led
Yeah.
eventually to their I wouldn't say decline. Well, their decline as an economic power and an imperial
Yeah,
power.
their relative decline globally. Yeah.
Right. And it always seems that technology is at the
Yes.
core of that change.
Yes. One of the most interesting technologically driven shifts in time, China had the capacity to reach Europe in the late 1400s. They had a fleet that got to East Africa, and they quite easily could have made it to Portugal before Portugal made it around to Indonesia. They made the internal political decision to stop reaching out to the world, right? And they were the Middle Kingdom, and they had the spheres of influence across each Asia, and they kind of withdrew into themselves. The result was 200 years later, a whole bunch of European warships showed up at their shores and dictated terms, which then dictated China's evolution for another 100 odd years until it finally kind of grabbed back its sovereignty for itself after World War II. And it was a very long and difficult period with lots of famines, lots of civil wars, what have you, invasion from Japan. Like China has been through this. They've learned, like over centuries, they've learned the lesson, and now they're proceeding carefully in establishing those global relationships. Unfortunately, it looks like the U.S. is ignoring its global relationships at this point in time.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point because the way policy gets made in China is very different than the way it gets made in the West. And they have these plenums where they put together they arrive, the Communist Party arrives at economic strategy, and it's very clear that their advanced technologies, their advanced manufacturing is designed to support and dovetail with their geopolitical ambitions.
Exactly. They work it all together. 20 odd years ago, were very much working to get up to Western levels of economic and technological development, right? And a lot of it was working with the Europeans, and a lot of US companies were going into China because they saw it as the next big market, right? But they were very careful to make all those companies partner with Chinese partners. And what they realized they had an iterative process of learning is what were we succeeding at and what were we not? One of the things they were not succeeding at was making really precision automobiles, like what the Germans and the Europeans tend to make, right? And that's when it occurred. That's when it occurred to them. But if we can make the jump to these electric vehicles over here and master the batteries and master the technologies, we can go right around that, and it will have all the benefits, all the macroeconomic and currency benefits, because they didn't have enough oil. They had very little to work with to actually work as a major power, and that allowed them to go around those problems. But because they have that strategic way of thinking, they could think in those 20 to 30-year terms.
And that leads us to the question of how fast the process of decarbonization, or electrification, as I call it, how fast it's going to happen. And there, if you look at, you're an energy modeler. I mean, a lot of what I know, the little bit that I know about modeling, I've learned from you. And one of the things so when I read modeling, I look at the assumptions behind the modeling. It was always your advice. And like an OPEC will say, oh no, the clean energy technologies are going to be uneconomic well beyond 2050, and governments don't want to subsidize them anymore. Therefore, they're going to stick with oil and gas. And then the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has the opposite assumptions. It's, that costs are coming down, competitiveness, and they'll eventually push those fossil fuels out of the market. And
Yep.
so then the question becomes, which model do we agree with? And because the two of them, the IEA says very fast, OPEC says very slow. And it seems to me that Canada has aligned itself with the OPEC view of how the energy system is going.
I might argue that Canada is of two minds. We're kind of, unfortunately, because of our geographic dispersion, the resources we have, what have you, we're both what one might call an electrostate moving into the future, and a petrostate, right? And you can imagine the provinces and governments that would be allocated in the petrostate and electrostate buckets, right? So there's a push and pull inside Canada, much as there's a push and pull inside the United States. The problem is that push and pull slows you down, right? You're not going fast in any direction when you can't make decisions moving forward. Now, the thing is, China is very much in the electrostate bucket, moving as fast as possible. Europe is in the electrostate bucket, moving as fast as possible, and the countries that are in their spheres of influence are moving with them because they benefit. They don't have a lot of fossil fuels. They don't have a lot of crude oil to benefit from. It just benefits them to move on to solar and wind powered electric vehicles, right? It's an out and out benefit one way or the other. So the question is, can we sort out, like, it's not impossible to be Norway, right? We could keep selling the oil we have at the highest value possible, but and keep upgrading it to higher and higher value products, not necessarily selling more barrels, but better barrels, right? To the best, and generating money that way. But also basically isolating our economy from those effects. So taking that money, using it for investment, using it for national or provincial trust funds, what have you, which is what the Norwegians have done, as opposed to using it for consumption, right? So there is a different path available to us. I'm working on a bit of a paper to this effect, but we have to make that choice, and we have to make the choice as a whole instead of our individual electro provinces and petro provinces arguing with each other.
We're coming to the end of our conversation, Chris, but it seems to me that if Canada has a choice to make, the Carney government is making odd choices. Because in the spring, winter, spring, we were responding to Donald Trump's bullying and his tariff war, and great big burst of nationalism and economic nationalism, and Mark Carney, as Prime Minister, promised that we were going to fix that problem. We were going to get new customers and so on. What we seem to be doing, though, in practice over the summer, is we're doubling down on what we've always done. which is export oil and maybe then export gas. We're just looking for different customers. We're not diversifying. We're not going choosing the electrostate bucket and pivoting
Yeah.
in that direction. And I think this is a strategic mistake. I agree with you. We could turn hydrocarbons into materials as fuel demand comes down. And we could do it by electrifying all those processes and on and on and on. There's a whole
Yeah.
conversation to be had about that. But I would argue, and see if you agree, that Canada, the strategy that it's chosen to push back against Trump and to take us forward is in fact more of the same of what we've always done. There isn't a fundamental change. We're just looking for new customers in different countries.
Yeah, I at this point in time, until I see a fall budget, until I see a major project list, I'm going to give the Carney government the benefit of the doubt. That we don't know yet. Well, and the thing is, they can only act on major projects that are proposed, right? And obviously, we're looking for other customers and what have you. It is indicative that I believe the head of TMX is on that major projects office, and that, you know what, building out TMX could be a legitimate strategy within a broader electrostate development strategy, which is kind of doing a
Mhm.
Norway, right? One way or the other, right? But putting all our buckets in the petrostate thing is not going to, it's not going to work in the long haul. Like, it's basically by the time I'm an old man, we're going to be heading towards 60 to 80%. Or by the time my kids are middle age, I should say, we're going to be globally 60, 80% electrified on the demand side, like buildings, transport, what have you. Industry will be slower, chemical sector will be slower. There'll be a lot of residual oil demand for older transport and aviation, what have you. But the economics now work that most of the new things are going to be that way, most of the world, if not in North America, because we have so much fossil fuels. We need to put at least 80% of our eggs in that bucket, while making sure we can make it through the present in terms of generating fiscal revenue and just paying our bills and living with the economic structure we have today. But we really do need to be thinking towards that long-term shift to an electrostate.
Well, Chris, this is a great introduction to further conversations as those national projects of national interest are identified by the Carney government. There'll be a list of them, as you mentioned, and they promise to start adding to that list this fall. So we're
Yep.
only a short time away from seeing those, and I think I'll have you back to comment as the list grows.
No, I'd love to do that, Markham.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. This has been an enlightening conversation.
Pleasure as always.